It's like
Well, in a
you're
perfect world, we would expand. So I'm sorry, I talk too much, but I drove cross country last year and I saw thousands of miles of abandoned farms. Jason's moving to Iowa, I think. There's so much, like, it's just expanding your feelings. Like, I grew up in Jersey thinking I wanted to live in New York or LA or Miami, which I've lived in all three, always thinking that was the goal. But maybe the goal is, to reclaim the land, maybe start a farm, go, start
Yeah.
a family, go out there. Like, the land's not, there's so much abandoned land as you drive across the country. It's unbelievable. And
So
and in the
moving
name of
now?
what? Saving the land? No.
Hey, Nancy, this is your first Union of the Unwanted. You want to give a little brief introduction and then give us your thoughts on what we're discussing?
Well, I'm from New York, born and raised, and I'm leaving New York. It's just maddening. I used to actually work at Goldman Sachs, and I ran all of the e-commerce there. Programmer is my first passion. Then I became a functional medicine specialist. So I've seen the lies and deception in both brokerage and high corporate, as well as in medicine. So I've worked with special needs kids. That was what I did 20 years ago in my private practice. And 95% of the time, it was due to an injury that the doctors denied ever happened. So I see that deception. I see what's going on with Google, because I have the only place that I can put information out is on a password protected website that I own on my own server for now. Otherwise, everything was censored. Even simple things like I was in the heart of New York, in New York City, and I had so many people that we kept out of the hospital doing homeopathic and herbals, and I couldn't put that information out online. So I've worked with doctors who were able to give medications, perhaps illegally, once Andrew Cuomo put an executive order saying medicine couldn't be given to COVID patients. It's just maddening. And where it's going is even worse. I mean, like Trump or don't like Trump, there's so much stuff going on that's beyond who he has sex with, what he pays in taxes. These are all distractions. And it's all about the control. And I think Fauci and Gates and China and everything else. So I love the fact that you have all these amazing minds come together. I just see it in both corporate world as well as medicine, that there is censorship and the people are clueless. And they listen to their doctors and they listen to their politicians. And it's really sad.
Well, it's funny because Zach briefly said this, and I talked about on a recent podcast or interview or something about how it's funny how historically you would think like functional medicine, that type of natural remedies, that's more of a left thing, right? That's like, you think hippies, you think like, oh yeah, F big pharma. And now it's like, all of a sudden I see myself on the Trump side, just like you. I'm a political atheist. I don't care for either party, but it just happens that I have a stance on an issue, and then I look at, okay, this party happens to agree with me on this issue, and that's okay. They're on my team for this issue, and but everybody makes it political. But it's hilarious because a lot of people on the left that are so anti-Trump, they don't realize they're going against a lot of things that they were for not too long ago in regards to natural remedies and anti-chemicals, anti-GMOs, and all these things that are now, weirdly enough, more on the right than on the left. So it is funny how things change like that.
That's the 4D chess for you. Right.
If I can say something in regards to, we attended a talk recently with Robert Kennedy Jr., and it was in Marin, which is, I also identified as left and also functional medicine consultant. And someone in the audience asked, what happened to the Democratic Party? And Robert Kennedy Jr. said that around the Reagan era, shortly afterward, is when the left started. Up until then, they were taking money for elections only from labor unions and trial lawyers, and then they started taking money from big pharma. And that's when things went downhill as far as lobbyist money.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and they talked about this. I mean, Trump. This is the thing: is a lot of times you're like, okay, am I getting caught up in this? Like, I'm getting tricked the same way that people who thought Obama was going to change things. Am I getting tricked with the Trump thing? But in some circumstances, you can make the argument that everybody says when they like a politician, like this guy's different. But in this actual situation, he is slightly different. He is the only person who actually entertained the idea of vaccine safety and like kind of a provoking thought in regards to talking about there could be some risks in getting vaccinated too early or too often. He brought it up during a debate. I know that he was in talks initially with Robert Kennedy Jr. and I think we talked about this on one of the recent podcasts. How Bill Gates, that clip of him saying, "Oh yeah, I talked to him and he was talking to me about his concerns," and I'm like, "Oh no, you're crazy. Vaccines are safe," and blah blah blah. So I mean, how many other presidents would kind of, I guess, even entertain that?
Right. Also, I worked for him. I don't know if you guys know that, and briefly, but my parents are down there, and they live in Palm Beach. And I'll tell you something. The good thing about Trump is that he changes his mind. With all these other politicians, they're working for a big conglomerate of people that tell you what to think. Trump likes it better when, he's not told. He's constantly on the move. The guy doesn't sleep. He's like a robot, but in a good way, I think. And he processes all the information and he wants to hear from his worst enemies first. He's a different breed of human. And, he never went out. He plays chess like all day, all night, leaves the table like it's for real. And the truth of the matter is, I think he's just looking for answers because he doesn't want his grandchildren to grow up in the world that the UN is pushing for. But back to you, Ricky. But all I'm saying is I think Trump actually listens, period.
Well, look, he first said that medicine works, right? Hydrochloroquine. And then they crucified him. What I thought, and I think it was brilliant, because he was never really for flu shots or anything. But his whole stance on this vaccine was almost like when he brought the Navy ship to New York. He can't do it. Then it's there, and Cuomo doesn't use the freaking thing. So I think with the vaccines, he actually turns people into like anti-vaxxers, because you had Biden saying, I need to see the ingredients of those vaccines. We're not just going to get vaccinated because Trump says it's available. And I was like, I think that was so brilliant. I don't know. I really do believe he played them because he changed the whole stance. Like, here, you want the thing? Here it is. Because if I say it's going to work, then you deny all the doctors. I know Andrew Cuomo did the executive order saying no one with COVID could get that medication in New York.
And not only that, he just said that they're not going to allow his vaccine either. So outside of the FDA, he's already said that they're going to test it. He doesn't trust the federal government. The other thing the entire media is downplaying, and it's almost impossible to find, is that Scott Atlas has said on the record now 3 separate times, it will be voluntary. I can guarantee you the next vaccine after the election will not be voluntary. How can I guarantee that? Cuomo put it up there. As he said it in the same breath, he said, we will be the first COVID-free state. We will be the first fully vaccinated state. We will have 40 doses ready. And when those studies come out, they'll be fine. Remember, he's the guy that did ban any alternative treatment, and hydroxychloroquine had the worst death rate. I'm jumping state 2 days from now. It's over. Our state is done. I cannot believe this ignorance. You know that outbreak that supposedly happened in my town, Oneonta, New York? There is one small article out there that you can barely find where now those numbers are in jeopardy. And the health department is backpedaling, and they were never added to the state count. This is all a mirage at this point. They don't want to talk about herd immunity. Rand Paul owns Fauci, owns his ass in the halls of government, and they make him into the demon. So, with Zach here, I got to ask him, his revelations were huge. You actually had people within Google stand up within the last few years against the drone program they were writing AI for the military. What is it going to take? Is it going to take somebody leaking a video of Eric Schmidt strangling a child while Sergey Brin tapes it? Like, what's it going to take for people to wake up that these people are monsters, man?
I think they already have. I think that the amount of surveillance is being revealed to the public. They now just automatically assume that anything that they have, that they're being tracked. I mean, that's the number one question that everyone asks me is, how is Google tracking me? And the thing is that this information is going to continually roll out. I feel like I may be, 5 years ahead of everyone else in understanding the degree of surveillance. But once people start to understand that the surveillance is everywhere, and I'm talking about, it's not just like Google tracking your location with the GPS satellite on your phone. It's also the cell phone companies are taking your information, triangulating where you are based on your cell reception with nearby towers. Even if you hit private on your browser, that doesn't stop your ISP from getting the information and then selling it. And who are they selling it to? Well, they're not just selling it to these ad networks. They're also selling it to foreign intelligence organizations, in China, in the UK, in Australia, the Five Eyes. There's an open market for this stuff. And all of that stuff is getting sold to these intelligence orgs, and they're creating shadow profiles of people. So basically, like a Facebook profile that you never even knew existed is being created in all these, umpteen different places around the world. And all the information that they're able to get and match to you is being fused into that shadow social media profile. And to keep this up to date, they have to have real-time information about what you're buying, where you're at, who you're talking to. And the issue that we have right now in America is that there's an asymmetry between us and other countries. So we are selling our citizens' data to places like China. Do you think China is selling information back to the United States about information on its citizens? No. So there's an asymmetry. And if you look at the ramifications of this asymmetry, what you're going to realize is that this gives China a military advantage. If they're buying location information on our CIA or NSA agents, they can kill them. They can whack them. Pretty soon, we're going to have more drones out there in the streets. You can put a gun on this drone, and it can come and it can find your head and then come point blank range and then fire that one bullet into your head and splat. That's it. You're dead. That's a kill drone. Do you think that the United States military is going to allow this sort of real-time information that will power these kill drones in the United States if they don't have the symmetric ability to do it in these other countries? No. And if they shut off this data export, and I believe that this is going to be the next thing, is this user data export to these other countries. Once they shut that user data export down, what's going to happen to the money stream that's coming to pay for this data stream? It's also going to dry up. And so Google, Facebook, these big technological behemoths that are selling that data, that sweet data to Facebook, to China, into the UK, into Israel, into Australia, and the whole Five Eyes, that's going to get shut off. And so is the revenue stream back. And this revenue stream is one of the big things that are powering our social media companies today. And so I believe that these tech companies are headed for a collapse in the future by essentially the weight of their own illegal activities. And so, but before we need to have that happen, we need to start educating the public. And I think there's going to be a push to start telling the people about how creepy this is, because it's really engaging content when you tell people this is how Google is watching you. People just click that like nobody's business. So as soon as the powers that be that run America decide that they want to start a campaign of driving fear into people, then you're going to start seeing this happen. And then you're going to know that the politics are going to be following close behind.
Is it the private sector that's selling the information to China then? Is
Yes.
or is that the private sector kind of slash U.S. government? Because it seems like the U.S. government has its tentacles into like all those companies you just named. So it's, I mean, the West has always been kind of susceptible to countries that are more authoritarian and have the ability, because I mean, it's like the same thing as like Graham and I can't go to China and start buying up land or, you know,
Right.
buying up resources or starting companies to compete or buying stocks in Chinese companies so that we can, you know, it just seems like another pillar that eventually they're going to use our freedom as just an excuse to why we're weaker than these other countries.
I have to interject
this
as a
is the
libertarian.
Go ahead.
I just am thinking that if you look at all the money we spent on defense over the years, technology, that so many of these countries basically get the stuff they use to their advantage from us and our kind of centralized government overspending on stuff that would not have emerged in a free market. And I feel like it's important to always look back and say, okay, what could we stop doing to make this scary thing go away, rather than they have an advantage because they're like overwhelmingly totalitarian. And I actually do think that, I don't really think that we have that kind of freedom from our government. I think that they're doing, in answer to like your original point about the public, is it public or private? I feel like it's, if you look at Google Sidewalks, for example, they're looking, I think in Canada, actually, it was supposed to be in Toronto. They're looking for a public-private partnership to kind of make a smart city where that kind of, what Zach's talking about, that kind of surveillance, that kind of location, stuff like that, it just like emanates from your interaction with the city itself. And I feel like this COVID, the Great Reset, all this stuff may come together to, and Trump wants to bring an infrastructure plan in, and it could play right into that stuff. So I think it's even a bigger picture than the nation states that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, it's happening in New
Because I
York.
think they're using
right. LA
like,
too.
I think the U.S. uses
right.
the private sector as, you know, an excuse to step all over the Constitution
And the money, they
and
yet get the money from it.
They
There's
have unlimited money. They can't fail, or they can just keep buying up competition.
Right.
I mean,
Also,
it's a
what is
scary thing.
InQtel? Zach, do you know a lot about InQtel? Why does our government have a hedge fund buying into
A venture capital fund, like putting money into Google and Facebook.
right?
I
It's
mean,
like private, public, but we're paying for it, right?
yeah. I mean, they want to pump in money into the private sector to create these surveillance platforms. You know, it's DARPA, InQtel, these quasi-government entities that are funding a lot of this. But I think that to say that the government is still within the hands of the private industry is not entirely correct. I believe that 4 years ago when Trump won, that it was essentially a new group of people taking over the United States government. And so even though I do think that you could say that InQtel and Facebook were really close to the government in 2015, I believe that that has been broken, that essentially they've been against the government, essentially they've been against Trump. And the reason why they were against him is because he's not part of the group that helped build those companies.
Well, let me ask you something, Zach. Let me just cut in. I'm just wondering, because you had Peter Thiel as his technology advisor in the very beginning. And, you know, he's a steering member of Bilderberg, obviously has his hands in all these tech companies, in Carbine 911, we could go on. You mentioned DARPA on top of that. I mean, what do you think? Do you think they put somebody like Thiel in with Trump to try to coerce him, and that's why Thiel's not around anymore? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my thoughts on Thiel are that, you know, I don't think that the elites have a monolithic view. I think that in the high up, you know, circles, there's a lot of disagreement. Mm-hmm. And I think that the rent-seeking elites, even though they've been more powerful, they're not necessarily the they're not generating new value. They basically own the system. And so they're like, how do we extract more power from it and give it to ourselves? And then you've got these other people that are within their circles that are truly the, have the gift of fire in their intellect. And I think that Peter Thiel's one of them. And he thinks that a lot of this, stuff kind of sucks. But, I don't think that Peter Thiel's necessarily got the best intentions, right? Like he's like, I interviewed for Palantir, one of his companies, and they were showing me all of their shadow profile stuff because they were looking for developers for that as a Java engineer. And I went, I just declined the job on moral grounds because that's a horrible thing. I was like, wait a minute, there's a non-consensual Facebook social media like group that you're working on. Like, that's terrible. And, they said that was only going to be used for terrorists, but I saw through that right away. So I don't think that they're necessarily monolithic. And I think that essentially what we have is we've got people that are saying, hey, look, let's get the capitalists, another fighting chance because they've done a lot of things good for the world. And, they're going to send us into space in the next decade, and privatize that. And I'm sorry if this doesn't answer your question. What was your question again?
Man, listen, man, I think you killed it with the Palantir stuff, by the way. I'm so glad you talked about that. I got to get you on my show for 2 hours. Are you kidding me? You talking about space, I'm glad you brought that up because, I'm extremely interested in NASA and Google's relationship that's kind of behind the scenes, whether it be the old school D-Wave machines or whatever they're doing with AI. But don't you see, this idea of space? It's not bringing us to the moon or going to Mars. It's militarizing space. It's putting up you talked about DARPA, Starlink's equivalent as well. And Starlink's just a part of this. At the same time, Elon Musk is introducing Neuralink. I mean, at the end of the day, these seem to be core proponents of a track trace database society where you get control of human beings, bring in the automation nation, get rid of God, like you said, get rid of the family, and that's it. The transhumanist agenda is here. And when you talk about, especially Google and NASA, I'd love to get your insight.
Google and NASA. Yeah, Google and NASA. I thought it was really weird when Barack Obama decided to defund NASA and move everything to SpaceX, a private corporation that, is going to take our money to develop stuff and then keep the technology and give it to whoever else wants to buy it. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to get NASA back, or, it looks like we're going to have a Space Force that's coming in. But what I really suspect is that we've got some sort of secret space program that's out there. And I believe that it's possible that there are certain types of propulsion systems similar to like the impossible EM drive.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about, brother.
I've been studying that physics, and it's real. You could take an electron and oscillate it with a electrical wave that is on the 1 terahertz spectrum. So, it's a trillion oscillations a second, and that electron will start to drop mass and go negative. And once you start realizing that there's negative mass, there's like really interesting things you can do with that mass. So if you've got like a particle and you can drop its mass, then you can move it to one side of your ship with more mass, and then make it do negative mass, and then move it back the other side. There's going to be a net directional force on that ship. And it's like, well, what could these scientists do with that? Especially if you can start dropping mass, then you can drop your inertia, and that inertia means that now you can have a spaceship that stops on a dime and moves really quickly in one direction. Like can go from stop to a full 60 miles per hour in like a split second. Like forget the Tesla. 3.5 seconds. We're talking like nearly instantaneous acceleration. And I didn't believe in the conspiracy stuff or UFOs until I literally saw a UFO with my girlfriend in 2002 at the University of Oregon when I was walking home. It was like dusk, and I looked up and I was like, God, what kind of star or planet is that? It was like really bright. And then all of a sudden it just goes poof, and it just like arcs, 15 degrees across the sky to the right and then stops on a dime and then does the same thing, except this time, like leaving the atmosphere, just like a streak of light just disappears. And I saw that and I went, what the heck was that? And later on, I was like, well, maybe that was a dream. Maybe I had it mistaken. And so I texted, my girlfriend from back then. And I said, hey, did we really saw that, right? She's like, oh yeah, we really saw that. I don't know what it was. And it was really scary. And so this is when I started to think about like, well, maybe there's some evidence here for this, because if these electrogravitic drives exist, and there's going to be some sort of like associated information that I can find. And oh my God, there's so many patents, that display this, that talk about this negative mass. And it goes back to this guy named Maxwell. And, when I review some of these videos on these UFO tech sites, they're like, yeah, Maxwell's equations are all truncated. And if you look at what the full equations are, then you'll actually see that the density of space itself, the ether density, can contract or expand. And then you look at these patterns, it turns out that they're all essentially riding a wave of ether density that's increasing behind them based on their manipulation of this electromagnetic field. And so it's like, and then that ties back into the negative mass of the electron that is observed when you use a 1 terahertz electrical field. And it's just like, oh my God. Okay. So there's a container for all of these really advanced electrogravitic drives to exist. And if that's the case, then, free energy is also on the table. And so I think what's going to happen in the future is that, not only are we getting like a disclosure on a whole bunch of stuff, like you've heard about Epstein. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think that what's also possible is that there's some sort of free energy, electrogravitic, hypersonic space propulsion that has been in use for essentially the last 5 decades. And that's going to be revealed to the public over the next decade.
So do you think that Trump, the same way you mentioned that there was a broken connection between Trump's administration and big tech, do you think that same thing is happening with the race to disclosure from the deep state? I mean, I really think there's different deep state factions here trying to get ahead of disclosure of real UFOs and technology.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think that Trump's got control of YouTube and Google, and essentially they're all participating in a constructed dialectic. I think there was a time when Google was really trying to do the coup. I think that the people that lost the 2016 election thought that they could possibly get Trump out of there and undo the things that he was doing. But I really think that in 2017, that was the end of the whole thing with the Las Vegas massacre that happened. For those of you that follow it, looks like that was a failed assassination attempt on MBS, who was there that week, believe it or not, and had the whole top floor of the Mandalay Bay where the shooting took place rented out, interestingly enough. And so as an insider, I follow QAnon, and so I fully expected that in 3 days, all the QAnon accounts would be wiped off of YouTube. And so every single day I was sitting on there doing a search on Google's internal search engine, is this the day that the leftists are going to figure out about this QAnon thing that's happening and they're going to get rid of it? Day after day after day, I saw nothing until one day I did see something. And there was a bug report that got generated and it said, hey, there's this Q account. They're doing fake news. We need to get rid of it. And then it was like, comment as they were implementing that censorship. And then at the last hour before the censorship would have taken place, someone jumped on that wasn't part of the comment thread. And they stated, there's been a policy decision change and we're going to let this account stay up.
Wow.
And I went, who made that decision? And who came from somewhere? So, if QAnon was really something that the deep state was against and having this war at this point, then it would just all be gone. We wouldn't even be able to hear about it. The links would not work when you put it in your Facebook Messenger, and no one would report on this. That's what I think would be happening if it was, if the deep state was really in a fight against Trump. At this point, the only thing that I can see is that Trump is basically holding the puppet strings, or the people that are controlling Trump are holding the puppet strings of both the left and the right now. And let's face it, if the left wanted to win, they would have put Bernie Sanders in charge, right? You got Biden, okay? Creepy Biden that wrote and authored the prison pipeline with his super predator laws. You've got Kamala Harris, who put them away into prison.
Kamala.
That's the people that are running on the left. There's no way that the left is really putting up a real fight. In fact, I'm going to lose money because I put bets on the prediction market that Biden was going to be swapped out. And if Biden isn't going to be swapped out before November 1st, then the whole thing is controlled by the guys that control Trump. We're in a false dialectic, and all this stuff is fake. And the predetermined thing is that Trump's going to get the next 4 years as the next president of the United States.
I agree.
Well, that's
Despite them trying to do their corruption with the mail-in voting.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's all smokescreen, though. I think there's no, well, my opinion anyway, is that there is no left and right. It's just, a giant smokescreen so that in the background, the oligarchs can just fucking do whatever they want. So,
Well, to create divide and conquer also.
yeah, so they keep us fighting about COVID and mail in this and abortion that and masks and fucking you name it.
But isn't that what's confusing? Because I agree with you 100%. But like we said, there are examples where Trump actually does do things.
Well, there has to be, because this is the thing, is like coming into Trump, they were losing everybody. Like, you had Obama kind of, and nothing really happened, but he was kind of smooth enough and he was black that everyone could just kind of fucking forget about politics for a while. And we can just let these guys run the place. And I think that was kind of dangerous for them, is because like no one was arguing enough and they were kind of losing that. So they needed Trump's kind of the polar opposite of Obama. They need someone to come in there and rile everybody the fuck up. And if he doesn't give us a couple things, then we're going to start, what they can't have is everyone turn on Trump, and they can't have everyone love Trump. So he's always going to ride that line of, just keeping everyone pissed off enough that we can't notice what's actually going on in the background. And to think that they were going to give up this for 4 more years of this, I mean, they can't have imagined it was going to go this well.
Yeah, but you think he went to the World Economic Forum and to UN then and specifically said that he's not going to accept this globalist agenda? Like U.S. is going to be free, so that's all just theater then?
Yeah, I think it's all
I don't know.
theater.
The first time that he didn't go to the World Economic Forum and Scaramucci went instead, he made a speech kind of like, this guy will surprise you. Don't judge him. He's not the enemy you think he is. And look, he's right in lockstep with the World Economic Forums from everything from Event 201 to the Great Reset. I mean, it looks like maybe he isn't, but he isn't questioning the basic premise of the COVID thing. I mean, he's not. He's just.
If Obama was in charge right now, the right would be burning down the fucking country.
Absolutely. Or Hillary. Could you imagine people putting their guns away for Hillary?
It's hard to think about because, and that's just the thing. There's nobody else that could fucking pull off what Trump just pulled off with the American people and not have a bunch of people with guns out in the streets storming, in my opinion, the fucking White House.
And the entertainment for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 4 years straight, that guy can get out there.
And QAnon helps that all out. That's all extra fodder to keep, the us, the crazies at bay, because, we're the ones who are going to cause a problem.
Last week, I interviewed G. Edward Griffin on my show, and I asked him right out of the gates about QAnon, and he likened it to something back in the 70s called the White Dove, where it was always the White Dove was releasing information and just hold on and sit back and don't do anything because the White Dove has got the intel, and it turns out the White Dove was this trailer trash couple who were just, had been accused of fraud and all this other stuff, and then eventually were outed. And to America's point, I mean, I was a gigantic Trump fan. I mean, all my activism started. I did 10% of what the Russians did by myself on Facebook. One of the first videos I came out with said he was going to win in September 2016, and they're going to blame it on the Russians. And so I had that. And so this time, I think as Biden is, I think they're going to steal it. And obviously it's going to be, they're going to do everything because Biden is just a puppet. We all know that. But with Trump, he's able to get stuff through that no one else can get through, to a lot of the other commenters' points. And my big thing, I came in through the Ron Paul revolution and end the Fed. I mean, the Federal Reserve has now doubled in size. We've taken a third of all mortgages are now on the Fed's balance sheet. All the corporate bond, not all the corporate bonds, but a lot of the corporate bonds are now on the Fed's balance sheet. Even junk bonds, they're levered up 7 to 1. This is a corporate, basically bank bailout. And then, and somebody was talking about, whether this is the government doing it or private companies. Well, they're so intermixed right now. The former head of the NSA, Keith Alexander, is now at Amazon, and then they came out with their new connected bike called Echelon, and Echelon is a secret code name for the Five Eyes surveillance program, where maybe it's not the U.S. government or NSA spying on us, but we get the data from the UK or New Zealand or somebody else. And so I just bring it back to Q. I think they were very desperate, and a lot of the information is real, but it's there to get people to shut up. So when I was pointing out that guys like Gary Cohn were getting in early 2016 as Trump's first economic advisor, and why is a Hillary Bundler, Goldman Sachs carbon tax credit guy, chief Trump economic advisor? Why is he in there? I didn't work my ass off to get a guy like him in there. And then why is Jerome Powell in there, who's they, them, those in there with all the elites for years and years and years, who was a disciple underneath Janet Yellen, and then he puts him in there. And I was constantly told, shut up, Trump's trusted plan. I mean, my initials are TTP, trusted plan, and I don't trust his plan. and it's just very disheartening because I kept telling him, shut up, and he knows more than you. But my main thing is the Fed, and I've seen that there's been more debt taken on through the Fed in the past 6 months than the past 100 years. And so for me,
I think they might actually wind down the Fed and just replace it with this new digidollars regime. So it'll look like you could say Trump ends the Fed. Like, I'm with you 100%.
And that's going to be even worse because
I know, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And they'll still say, oh, he did it. That's what you wanted. Isn't that good enough for you? And you forgot Wilbur Ross, who was the Rothschild guy. He's in his administration.
And the very first Maxine Waters $1,200 bank or stimulus program was actually, if you read the bill, was actually meant to be a digital dollar through the Federal Reserve .now account. You also had the former Coinbase, I think it was either CTO or one of the top Coinbase, which is the largest U.S. cryptocurrency exchange, is now the head of the Office of Comptroller Currency, went in place April 1st of this past year. And so, I mean, they're getting all the pieces in place, and they're eventually going to make it where you can't, travel unless you get the vaccine, because it's going to be tied through social credit and social engineering. And I also moved out of New York, so I guess we can join the Union of the Former New Yorkers panel over here. But
as they drive people into take all their retirement money away with the volatility in the market, destroy businesses, take their jobs away, those digidollars aren't just going to be so that you can get on a plane. They're going to be so you can get on the food line. You're going to need to be a citizen in good standing.
And when they have negative interest rates, they can siphon the money directly out from your bank account. So instead of having a bank bail-in, which if you go back to 2014, the former vice chairman of the Fed, Stanley Fischer, who is an Israeli citizen, former Bank of Israel chairman, just pointing that out, that he said that he in one of the speeches in Stockholm, Sweden, was talking about having bail-ins, which is where they give you a haircut. But I think what they've realized is that just taking your money is too brazen. That what they'd rather do is just inflate it away through inflation. But to a lot of people's points here, how we're able to pay for this is we are currently the world reserve currency, and that is probably not going to last forever. It's definitely not going to last forever. And it's probably not even going to last another, 15, 20 years at this rate. And we're just, getting the noose tighter around our necks. And, but I am hopeful that we'll have, some sort of decentralized, cryptocurrency based, platforms and other ways, just, whether or not it's all too little too late. And then how, will we manage the search functions around that? And if we're only, talking to our own echo chamber, is it even going to work? But, I am hopeful, in the end, because eventually it's going to create censorship resistant media. But in the interim, I think that the main battle here is whether or not we take this Federal Reserve dollar, because once they get us on that system, it's game over at that point for everyone that's sucked into that. And they're probably going to say, hey, if you exchange your dollars into this Federal Reserve dollar, then what we're going to do is, give you an extra couple percent, and they're going to make the deal really good. And then eventually, like a frog boiling, they're going to completely cut people off. And, and we've all been talking with each other. So I'm sure we're all going to be on the contact tracing list of, hey, you spoke to any one of these thought criminals, so you're banned.
The IMF said there would be an exchange rate with cash for the digidollar, an exchange rate with cash, so that your
Well, that's
cash
all
is
part of
gonna
the
be worth-
special.
Right.
That's all part of the right, which actually the day before they Facebook Libra was almost identical to what the special drawing right is. But I guess we probably should get back to our guest here with on Google. And is Google working on anything in regards to digital dollar, or trying to? I mean, obviously they're trying to create like this big surveillance grid that I'm sure will be tied into all this.
Oh.
But do you know of anything Google is specifically doing in terms of digital dollars?
Not Google, but like there seems to be a trend that all these different companies, like Facebook is doing its Libra currency, and then there's other currencies like Ripple, which is backed by the US dollar, and it actually like took off. It's like huge now.
I should have bought some.
Right?
Ripple's not backed by the dollar. Something like Tether is backed by the dollar. So
Tether, that's
Ripper,
what it is. Yeah,
that's something else. And there's some Goldman Sachs people either behind that one or the Circle coin. But yeah, so one of my Ernest Hancock's been calling it for years, the FederalReserve.gov coin, and something he's been warning about for 4 years. And we're at that point where they weren't fully ready to roll this out in June and July, but the next $2,000 payment that you get, it's probably going to be through some sort of digital dollar, and people are going to be so poor that they're going to take this. And actually, the Brookings Institute was talking about, hey, how are we going to incentivize people to get the vaccine? And what their solution is, hey, we'll give everybody, I think it was like $1,000, but out of the gates, we're only going to give you 200, no pun intended with Gates. But to get your other 800, what you'll have to do is once we get 80% of the U.S. population having the vaccine, then we'll give the rest of your money. So then that way it's going to gamify it and cause all these Karens to out their neighbors and stuff.
Karens.
I mean, so obviously there's going to be rationing going forward. The question is how much stuff is there going to be to go around? And the problem is that we don't have any good way of imagining something that we've never experienced before. And I want to pick up the mood just a little bit, because our entire society is based off a scarcity model. And the oligarchs that rule today have all got rich by how they can manage that scarcity profile and allocate goods to their citizens. And then those entire civilizations go to battle against other civilizations. Then basically the winner at the top is who is able to manage this complex scarcity chain. And the thing about going forward with robots and all this other stuff is like, what is it that we really need to survive? We need a place to dwell. We need the ability to attain status. This is very important, especially if you're a male. And we need to have, be able to spend time with our peers, our family, and have a family. And so the thing is that, do we need to have, an economy that's allocated mostly to the consumption of its citizens in order to have a society? And in the past, it was the answer was yes. Basically like 90% of the economy was based around servicing the people. They were growing their own food is basically the majority of it. And then 10% of it was being used to build an army that you would then go and destroy other people with. Well, in the future, it's going to be like 95% of the economy is going to be used towards the manufacture of war and technology and whatever we need to navigate the skies with. And then the people are going to be given digital goods, a fine house to live in and dwell. And that's not going to necessarily take a lot of manufacturing inputs. Like, how much does it take to 3D print a house that lasts for the next 100 years? Like almost nothing, right? And so I don't necessarily think that an economy where we're rationed out with all of the goods and services that we need will not, and most of the economy is not allocated to the people, it's allocated to something that might actually be a paradise. And what we have to understand, and what we need to say is like, well, maybe it's not the rationing is bad. What we really have to worry about is these surveillance death bots that might decide that instead of, these oligarchs wanting 95% of the economy, they say, why don't I just take the whole effing thing? And so what we really need to, I think as a people need to do and come together is say, who's in control of this thing and what are their plans? And can we create an abundant society that is able to live in harmony with the planet and is able to channel the people's destructive tendencies and retool it so that we can live in harmony and not harm one another.